Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We are back. This is our first seminar of the new academic year. So hello to everyone that's joining for the first time. But actually this is the 20th seminar of the Cambridge Disaster Research Network, which is very exciting. And we have 23 people with us now and more coming in. Those of you that have joined before probably know already, but the Cambridge Disaster Research Network is a network that aims to connect people interested in disasters and disaster research, not just across the University of Cambridge, but also outside of Cambridge and outside of academia. So everyone is welcome, basically. I'm Rory. I'm one of the early career researchers who convened the network last year, but we have all new conveners this year, a new generation of PhD students who are taking over the network. And thanks to them, we have some really great seminars upcoming. The original conveners, myself included, are taking more of a step back. We're still involved and will be attending, but we're going to be hearing more from the new conveners in future. So today, just briefly, I'm going to hand over to them so that they can introduce themselves. And I'm going to do this alphabetically. So Ainsley, Ellen, Kate, Maria, and Tilly if she's here, but no worries if not. So over to you, Ainsley.
Hi, it's really nice to see all of you via Zoom. My name's Ainsley. I'm a first year PhD in the Department of Geography here at Cambridge, and I am studying collaboration and earthquake preparedness across Central Asia and the South Caucasus. So yeah, it's great to see all of you on Zoom.
Hi there, I'm Ellen Kuryava. Sorry, I have a little cold. I'm a second year PhD student here in the Department of Geography in Cambridge. And my doctoral work focuses on hurricane forecasting in the Caribbean, how that forecasting information moves and the sort of geopolitical power that it holds. Thanks for coming to our first CDRN session.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a second year student in the Department of Politics, and my PhD research looks at the politics of science advice during emergencies with a particular focus on health emergencies. It's so exciting to see so many of you here today.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm losing my voice as well. Thank you so much for coming here today. I'm a second year PhD student in the engineering department, and my PhD looks at how cities manage physical infrastructure systems to protect public health from climate-related hazards.
And hello, I'm Tilly. I'm from Durham University, and I am a second year PhD student. I am currently in California, so it is extremely early here. But I look at care and caring within wildfire risk management, so all on the emotion side. And looking forward to seeing you all.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. Today's seminar topic is the cultural sense of disasters. And I think this is a great way to start the term because this topic is so cross-cutting and so widely applicable. And we're very lucky to have two excellent speakers join us today to present. They're going to present together, so there's not really a divide, but first up is Benedict Orlowski, who's a research associate in the Department of Urban Research at the city of Nuremberg. And Benedict is a very appropriate speaker on this topic as one of the editors of the book Culture and Disasters. And I can also recommend his more recent book, Rivaling Disaster Experiences, which talks about the seismo-volcanic crisis in the Canary Islands, which we're going to hear about more today. And it actually has some of the coolest cover art of any disaster book, I think, out there. And actually, I'm going to drop a link to his profile and to the book in the chat.
So, sorry for the delay. I'm Dipendra. So I'm from Tokyo University of Agriculture, Japan. So I'm PhD third year students, and I'm doing research on disaster management in rural in Nepal.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Just for the others, the introductions are mainly just for the conveners, but thank you anyway. And just to drop those links in the chat. So that's Benedict's book and the link to his profile. And our second speaker is Dr. Klaus Geiselhart, who is a lecturer at the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität in Erlangen-Nürnberg. And I'll also put a link to his profile in the chat. which includes his many publications which cover his work in Botswana, which he's going to be presenting about today. So those are our two speakers. The structure today is that they're going to talk for around 12 to 15 minutes each, and then we'll have a discussion and Q&A at the end. So please save your questions to the end. Just the talks will be recorded, not the discussion. And the talks themselves we put up on the website and on our YouTube channel. So that's about it from me. Now with 31 participants in the room, I'm going to hand over to Klaus or Benedict. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction and for having us. Benedikt, do you share the presentation? Yes. Just a moment again. Don't you want to introduce it? Ja, jetzt noch starten. Yeah, I think it's okay now. You see the presentation now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the cultural sense of disasters. So here's a short outline what we want to do today. We just asked the question, what are fields of practice? Therefore, we need a little detour in epistemology. Then I talk a little bit about healing in Botswana. Then Benedikt will talk about the seismovolcanic crisis of Hierro. And then I conclude with some methodological conclusions. Yeah. So we all know it's a basic insight, epistemic insight, that the way we conceptualize the world has a huge influence of how we approach the world. So different ideas make different perceptions. So let's say what you see here is a surface of societal practice. This is the tangible world, which we can do research on, which you can see, we can hear, we can feel, whatever, how we approach it. Normally we see signs, artifacts, and customs. And oh, warum geht das nicht? Bist du auf der? Hast du jetzt? Ja, genau. Okay. Yeah. So we can approach differently. So normally cultural analysis sees a network of meanings. It for example, Clifford Geertz, he takes on a structuralist approach, a semiotic approach, whereby he's not about einfühlen, but he tries to figure out how the people understand themselves. He says what people say, they use concepts, but they use the concepts unself-consciously. And they often do not recognize that they use any concept at all. So it's a lot about interpretation, about finding out this deep structure of meaning, which lies below the surface of what we can see in the world. Post-structuralists normally take on a very different approach. So they develop what they call flat ontologies. They deny such deep structure. There are different ideas about that. Gilles Deleuze says there is no more representation, there's only action. So the surface is seen as a surface of events, of practical events. Also, Michel Foucault, for these events are discursive events, and they must be treated as discontinuous practices, he says. And there is not a pre-existing signification. So all is signifying in the moment, signifying in discourse. Deleuze and Guattari see this as a rhizome. And they say this is not a structural or generative model, which is to explain a rhizome. And there is no genetic axis or deep structure under this rhizome. they, for themselves, see it as a surface where different plateaus meet, intersect each other, and they form an assemblage on the surface. And the surface now is more cartographed, more mapped than analyzed. So there is about, you can find lines of articulation or segmentarity on this surface. There are strata or territories on the surface that you can map. You can find line of flights, movements of territorialization, destratifications, they call it. So, yeah. We thought that both conceptions have some merits. And we see societal praxis as a series of events as well, but not completely without a deeper structure. But this is not a coherent, not one structure, but we see these structures as deeper reaching paths. And these paths rely on what we call fields of practice. And fields of practice, they have some history, they are organized in some form, they thus have this path. Yeah, and therefore fields of practice produce certain amount of reliability or accountability. Yeah, and du darfst nicht in Zoom gehen, du musst in der Ding bleiben. Okay, so we see field as practices are a certain context where practices are institutionalized in order to render life and social action more predictable or reliable. And what they involve conventionalized dealings, agendas, guidelines, explicitly codified tasks and targets. And yeah, and you can find this field of practice in different forms, and it depends on your analysis how big and how small you identify these fields of practice. But these fields of practice also become fluid through singularities. And singularities, that can be certain events, such as hazards, which disrupt given practices, or they can be people, single people. Field of practices need staff. And each and every individual that enters a field of praxis has to adopt to it. And every individual brings some shortcomings, their own personalities, and makes mistakes. So these singularities make those fields of practice fluid. It's just shortly how I analyzed this in Botswana with regard to medical epistemes. So medical epistemes, here there are two of these fields of practices. One is clinical medicine and one is traditional medicine. And you see an ideological dimension, which is the knowledge, which is situated in each field of practice. We see probably nutrition or HIV in the clinical medicine. And we have performative dimensions, the dimension of practices. And here we see tests, different forms, how people are tested, how they are diagnosed. And then we have we need a third dimension, which is a logical dimension, which is the dimension of reasoning. And this is because when people, singularities, get in this fields of practice, they need to make sense of what they are doing. They need to make sense of they must combine the knowledge with the practices. So therefore, this logical dimension is a mediator between those both other dimensions. And by using these three dimensions, practitioners can make sense of actual situations and events. And they experience self-efficacy, and they experience the dealings as coherent. And now, and because these are different epistemes, you find fighting between these fields of practices. And especially in Botswana, we find accusations of irrationality from part of the modern doctors to the traditional healers. And this is an indication that something happens. Yeah. So praxis produces singularities. Praxis produces events, and personalities are inside of this practice. Practices are conventionalized dealings, but they need to adopt it to permanently new situations. They produce desired outcomes, and they frame multiplicity. So, as Anne-Marie Moll puts it, though nothing is sure or certain, tensions are tamed. And when hazard enters this system, you find that each and every field of practice has their own response. So clinical medicine, let's say HIV hit Southern Africa very hard. So there was a medication program on the part of the clinical medicine. Traditional healers, they experienced marginalization. And this is an important point, which Benedikt will show again. It often develops a new field of practice, which in this case is the self-initiatives, which came out in the whole country of Botswana at the time. And at this point, I will hand over to Benedikt.
Thank you. You have to put down your volume. Still on? Please put that down. Can you listen? Can you hear me right now? Okay. So the case study and now present will explore this a little bit further. It is about a submarine eruption that took place on Hierro in the Canary Islands in the year 2011 and 2012. You see this in the background. Just to give you some overview about the case study, Hierro is the westernmost island of the Canary Islands. It's situated in the Atlantic Ocean, and with only 10,000 people living there, it's the least populated island of the archipelago. Maybe one or other person has been on the Canary Islands yet. Well, it has a great landscape. You see a very diverse and rich landscape you have never experienced before. So it's a good location for alternative tourism and diving tourism. Well, at the time of the eruption, there was the Spanish economic crisis, and the island was hit hard because it's very dependent on external subsidies and tourism a little bit. But unemployment rate was about 35%. So what happened? This quiet atmosphere was suddenly interrupted as seismographs registered a strong onset of minor earthquakes. This was in July 2011. You see this on the map. Scientists were fascinated. They set up new instruments, but it was not clear what would happen. It was clear that an eruption could follow, but it was a great uncertainty where or when. So despite all this technology. And a special plan for civil protection came into effect for the first time, called PEVOLCA. And this uncertainty was a little bit lowered, as in October 2011, eruption started, a submarine eruption south of the island. It continued for 5 months. So a red alert state went into effect, and emergency staff and emergency forces were sent to the island. Even the Canarian army were sent there. And there have been several evacuations. And the authorities also imposed road closures and diving bans. So all this caused a heavy and intense media reporting in the local and international press, as well as vivid discussions in the social media. you can imagine. But before I go into details with that, let's have a short view on my research perspective. Klaus already introduced you to the fields of praxis. So I mainly work with that in combination with grounded theory and some considerations of pragmatist and phenomenology of Alfred Schütz. So I was especially interested in what kinds of fields are here involved and how can their rationals be described. So how do these fields interact? How are their rationals conflicting? Are there ambiguities, singularities developing out of this? So especially I was fascinated by the idea that there are gaps of rationals. You read this very often in disaster literature. So what is the significance of this between the fields? So, and what kind of views and risks on strategies evolve from these interactions? Also, I was interested, well, where is the spark of social change? So where is change coming into play? What is about creative actors within their logical boundaries, but with their own creativity? And what are the consequences here? What are unintended side effects? So I won't go into detail of this grounded theory thing, but let's have a look at the fields I found, or the fields involved. And first, let's have a glimpse on the media. It's important to have a look here on the specific practice of reporting about event to understand the rationale of the affected population. So in very simplified terms, the logic of the media is to inform, but also to provide us with new things, meaning to rupture our regular everyday life. In other words, you would never read about a volcano that did not erupt. That certainly does not count for all the media, but for some of them. So not surprisingly, the earthquake maps of the scientists and the evacuation measures were accompanied by a partly dramatizing media coverage. So headlines read like, is a Hierro about to explode, or beaches closed, poison gas alert on the Canary Islands. And interesting here is that the reporting has been seen very critical by the population, not only because this alarmism they call, but also because in the later course of the eruption, there were two contradicting narratives. They were competing. So on the one hand, a calming message, it's normal, it's okay, nothing will happen, nothing bad will happen. And on the other hand, scary news about a new onset of earthquakes, stronger, unexpected earthquakes. So the other very important field is, I can't read what's on the slide here. There are the civil protection actors, or the Pevolka, the plan, and all the people involved. So their rationale is to implement measures that are envisaged and defined in the emergency plan for volcanic risk, called Pevolka. And this plan defines responsibilities, hierarchies, alert levels, and the idea to inform the population in detail about potential risks and current developments of the situation. And it defines in a very hierarchical manner who's responsible for what matter. So as a result of the plan, the press notes of the authorities mainly contained information on earthquake activity, notifications on civil protection measures like alert levels, evacuations, and some scientific background information in the factual, technical wording. Additionally, the National Geographic Institute of Spain, so they have a National Geographic Institute, published real-time information about the seismic activity, explorable and downloadable for everybody. So people engaged in the management of the crisis, I learned from the interviews, were aware that the reporting about events have been becoming problematical. From their point of view, supposedly neutral information was biased or even misused by the media. And there was a growing sense among the responsible authorities that these negative entanglements are harmful for the acceptance of their measures. In addition, there was a heavy dispute among scientists about risks and responsibilities and their participation in the Volca board. It was difficult for them to channel all these contradictory statements and the diverse theories and communicate them as most comprehensible and unambiguous message. So you can say the experienced disaster of them was the loss of control over risk interpretation. What was the problem? The Volca communications manager told me that the information that was given was so much. It was too scientific. In the beginning, our public announcements was mixed a lot of information, scientific and technical information. And we always gave information like today there have been 25 earthquakes of magnitude such and such. And at the end we said, what nonsense. So there was insight here, a singularity you can call. But this had consequences because when you systematically analyzing the interviews, you can see that this phenomenon, crisis communication as a tightrope act, so information as a risk, led to some strategies. One of it was to provide reliable and trustworthy information. So they only started to only communicate what is necessary. So no technical, too uncertain or ambiguous information. And they wanted to speak with a single voice. So they tried to build a consensus in the absence of the public, among their board, among the involved scientists. And they demanded a restraint of the scientists. So also they included formerly excluded scientists into the Volca board. And they did something like, I don't know if this is the right phrase, run with the pack. So they started their own information management on the social media to counter all the spreading armchair volcanologist theories. And as a consequence, but there was an accusation of censorship. So there was a growing skeptical attitude among the public and the scientists. So this is some parallels to the situation we had a few months ago, maybe. So now let's switch to the point of the affected population, the Herendios. Of course, there are a very diverse social structure with diverse individuals and diverse singular life worlds. However, with the onset of this crisis, the external fields appeared and interacted with their everyday life in a very unexpected, if not violent manner, creating somewhat like a shared experience and an intensified feeling of being a Herenian community. So on the one hand, it's informative, but partly dramatizing news coverage, but different and contradicting theories about the potential risks and the eruption in combination with this mushrooming theories in bloggers and social media people. This triggered a great uncertainty and rejection among the affected Herenians. On top, the civil protection people, with their measures, they were sometimes considered as exaggerated because they did not they were not like the perception of the people there. So they contradicted sometimes. And even scientists become a source of irritation because they, with their public dispute, they added to this all this alarmism about their island and they framed them as a dangerous place. So it's understandable that their greatest risk is not the volcano itself, but the alarmism in the media and the exaggerated intervention. So one of the problems of the volcano was the bad information that was given. I can't read the quote because there is a video file here. The population alarmed. Could you?
Yeah, the press alarmed the population very much. If the population hadn't been so alarmed, we wouldn't have had so many repercussions or so much negativity. So we could be living as normal as everyone else is. The authorities didn't come up with a good handling of the topic and all the negative things the island has had.
So this framing of the island as a dangerous place was perceived as a true threat for the Iranian society. So it's comprehensible that many of their practices targeted to alter the representation of the event. So this was sometimes very subtle. So this sign says that it is forbidden to talk about the crisis and the earthquakes. There's a bit of trueness in this joke, because in confrontation with arguments about the risk on the island, interviews often refer to positive examples and attributes of volcanism, like on Hawaii. I won't go into detail of all the strategies I found here, but for example, local journalists managed their vocabulary. They didn't say terremoto anymore, but sismo. And one example of an interesting strategy was of a diving school. I talked with the diving instructor, and he said he set up an own weblog to counter all these images. And he said, luckily, I have a lot of loyal customers. I convinced them it's not a risk, and then they came. Actually, I didn't persuade people, but I just showed them what was the situation. So he wrote, quakes are almost non-existent, or the situation has calmed down. Life returns, it's a new chance for diving. So let's conclude this. Disasters can be seen as a situation of intensified interaction of fields of practice and their rationals. Irrationality is not a flaw in the system or accusations of irrationalities. It is the most natural thing of a disaster. It's the very nature of a disaster from this point of view. So, because each field experiences its own disaster, this is very striking, I think. And this gaps, the in-between the fields, these are the keys to understand the drivers, what is changing here. And they are also the point where you can start your research. So where are conflicts, where some ambiguous situations or double meanings, this is where you can focus on, because there is the interaction of the different rationals, there's the singularity, and there's the process of adaptation. So I give back to Klaus.
Yeah, so I come back with some concluding remarks. You should address disasters with the perspective of mediation, or say critical mediation. What does that mean? Not look for an integrative, true perspective. More knowledge does not solve any dissent. So there is no true interpretation. And you have to see different perspectives in their foundation, in the adequacies, in the inadequacies. And it is important to look at what each party misses for an understanding of the others. Du bist schon wieder aus dem Ding raus. And as I said, accusations of irrationalities, these are the signs, the obvious signs you can easily find when you go in the field. Yeah, and then it is about developing explanations of objectifications. You need to shed light on factors that might shed light on issues of dissent, factors that help to evaluate diverging perceptions of justice or injustice, of morality or immorality in the field of this ongoing disaster. And especially with the case, with my example of healing in Botswana, we found that traditional healers are very much aware of what the modern doctors do. They very good have a good understanding of what the modern doctors did. Otherwise not. The modern doctors mainly ignored the traditional healers. So therefore, for me, it was an incentive to describe what the traditional healers do in terms of how modern doctors might understand it. Yeah, look for things that might solve dissents. And therefore, threefold critique is necessary. You need a critique from positionalities. You need to know what traditional healers think of medical doctors and other ways around. You need a critique of ideologies, the knowledge which is in each field of practice. And then you need a personalist critique, because there are certain single people in certain places and certain positions at the time when things happen, and they can make a difference in the very situations. Yeah, thank you for your attention. Here are some readings. If you're interested in the concept of field of practice, we have that in that edited book that Rory has showed us before. On healing in Botswana, there are two articles of mine. Rivaling disaster experience of Hierro. Also, this book was presented by Rory before. And on critical mediation, there is a little chapter, Truth and Academia in Times of Fake News, Alternative Facts and Filter Bubbles, in a edited volume about the power of pragmatism. Thank you very much.